other than getting through this body?
Well, I point out that in general, for pieces of legislation, after January 1st, both houses have to pass a piece of legislation. We've obviously made some reforms under leadership of our Speaker to modify some of that process here in the Assembly so that starting with the next edition of our legislature, we won't have as much of a hurdle over January 1st, and we'll have more of a two-year type session. But that's not the currently established rules. So in general, a piece of legislation does have to pass both houses in the same year.
All right, well, let me ask a couple of, I won't say they're hypotheticals, they're real-life case studies for clarity for everyone in the chamber here. Had this constitutional amendment been in place a few years ago, the recent trials and convictions of former Speaker Silver and former Senate Majority Leader Skelos, would they be on the hook to lose their pensions?
I guess it depends on what a few years ago means, but
if it was in place at the time of their crime.
If it was in place 20 years ago?
Sure.
They were obviously both elected officials and therefore could have been subject to a provision like this.
All right. If this was law at the time and, say, a prison worker helped two convicted murders, one a cop killer and the other somebody that dismembered an elderly person, escape from a maximum security prison and be on the lam terrorizing the North Country for 3 weeks and costing the state of New York $23 million, would that state employee be eligible to keep their pension, or would that pension be protected, or would that be in jeopardy?
On the assumption that person is not a policymaker or otherwise qualifies under one of the other provisions, no, this is not a constitutional amendment that applies to all public employees in the state of New York.
I think this question may have been asked, but I want to ask one more time. I mean, the idea of, to me, of a constitutional amendment is big picture, broad strokes, and then what follows from that, what derives from the Constitution, the laws that we pass every day. They're not constitutional amendments. They get their authority from the Constitution. So, for example, in the Second Amendment, you say the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You don't say you can't discharge a firearm within 500 feet of a house, and these are the hunting regulations, and these are the hunting seasons. That's law. That's not in the Constitution. So what is the hesitation in this bill or in this House to have a broad, flexible, living amendment that from that implementing language could be debated on this floor, and perhaps that would be the place to put these added protections and restrictions in, so that maybe if this body decided, you know what, we want to be able to rip the pension from somebody that helped two convicted murderers escape from a maximum security prison, that we would have that option. Under your draft of this amendment, that's not an option.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend my learned colleague for acknowledging the wisdom of sensible gun safety legislation, completely consistent with interpretations of the Second Amendment. I think that it's very wise that we, in fact, understand that there's a lot of legislating to do, even in light of important constitutional rights. As to this matter, I think it's certainly fair to say that this is not the only way the legislature can address corruption in government or can address the punishments for those who are involved in corruption. But this is an effort to send a very tangible message that we are turning the page and will not stand for corruption in one of the most high-profile ways. And it's certainly true that there are going to be circumstances that aren't fully captured by this. We're going to have a lot more work to do beyond just the subject of pension forfeiture. That having been said, by getting this constitutional amendment to the point where it is on the verge of being able to become part of our state constitution, and obviously, as we've talked about, that process takes a few years because amending the Constitution is and should be a difficult process. We are taking tangible steps so that we convey not just to those public officials who are subject to pension forfeiture, but really to all public officials, that when they take their oath of office, and commit themselves to serving the people of New York, something we hold them to a very high standard. And, you know, I like to think that the leaders of departments, policymakers, and otherwise are there in part to set the example. This is something that certainly accomplished that, and I would like to think that everyone who oversees a department or an office in the state of New York is able to convey how important the people of New York view this, so that malfeasance in office is diminished.
Thank you. I have one more question for you, and I appreciate your entertainment here, David. Certainly, we've all been around here long enough to know that big issues like this don't get decided on a whim. Lord knows we've had 14 and a half months since the Senate passed the budget agreed to version. And I haven't been privy to all the discussions that have occurred by members in this room. But I'm curious, now here we are, last day of session-ish here, and last window to, yeah, you like that? This is the last opportunity we'll have by this legislature, and as my colleague pointed out earlier, if we don't do it this year, then we will lose essentially 2 more years of this process. So very important question to ask here, is the Senate on the same page? I don't want to go home like we did in 2015 and have everyone in this chamber running around with a victory lap saying we did pension forfeiture and the other house didn't, and then have the same problem where the Senate is running around saying we did pension forfeiture, oh, by the way, the version that was agreed to in the budget negotiations, and the Assembly didn't. We cannot have this situation going on. The state of New York, the people of the state of New York do much better than the legislature doing this and getting nothing done. So how certain are you that the Senate is on the same page with the Assembly, and that we are going to have a matching set of bills? Schoolhouse Rock says for something to become law, it has to match both houses.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me say I am personally totally committed to seeing the Assembly and the Senate pass the same constitutional amendment. I believe that is going to happen, but I've committed myself to that throughout this year, and frankly, as extension of the 4 years that I've been pushing for a pension forfeiture constitutional amendment. I believe that this is something that in the fullness of time over the not too distant future, we will be able to see that results are achieved for the people of New York. But obviously, we remain in session so that we know that that is happening.
All right, thank you. Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill, sir.
Well, first I want to thank Mr. Buchwald for his efforts on this, and we've shared this journey together for the last 4 years, and I'm glad to see that we're on the cusp. I thank the Speaker for his role here, and I understand the issues here, and I understand what has to happen in Albany. But with that said, the past transgressions of some of our former members, some of the Senate's former members, and frankly some other non-elected members have caused the people of the state of New York to question the credibility, the trustworthiness of their elected officials and many of their non-elected officials. And our own lack of action on this in the last few years has been very obvious to all of our constituents, and frankly, it's been inexcusable and unforgivable. I suppose late is better than never, but we need to move this forward, and I implore everyone in here and the speakers here, I'm glad that we need to make sure that we are on the same page with the Senate, and hopefully that'll happen. But this is long overdue, and I personally would have gone farther. I would have liked the larger universe. That would have given us the flexibility to address those truly egregious situations. Somebody allows 2 convicted murderers to escape. That to me is worthy of stripping somebody of their pension. This bill, unfortunately, will not allow that punishment applied to that crime. So this is a subset of the universe that I wish we would go after. But I suppose at the end of the day, the old saying, half a loaf is better than none. So while I would have liked, I think this could have been better, broader. This is what's in front of us, and I'm not going to say no to it. I will be supporting this bill. I encourage my colleagues to support this bill. More importantly, I encourage our leadership to make sure that the Senate ensures that we have matching first passages of this constitutional amendment so that we can get off this dime finally, get second passage next year, and get this to the voters, where I know that you will see a tremendous outpouring of support for a constitutional amendment here And as Mr. Buchwald pointed out, this is only the beginning of our ethical journey. This is something we should have done 14 and a half months ago. We should be focusing on other ethics reform. And by my watch, it's 11 o'clock at night, and we're going to be back here tomorrow, one extra day. And we don't, unless there's a calendar that I'm not aware of, we don't have any other ethics reforms in front of the House here this session. I think that's an opportunity lost. But again, I will be supporting this amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. McDonough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield for
Will you
question?
yield, Mr. Buchwald?
I will, Mr. Speaker.
First of all,
Sponsor
Mr.
yield.
Buchwald, thank you. First of all, as you know, and I think everyone in this House has been receiving emails and editorials and everything about doing something given recent events. But first of all, please, I am not an attorney and I'm certainly not a constitutional scholar, so feel free to interrupt me at any point when I say something that's totally wrong, because I have a lack of understanding. My first question is, the first step is we have to get the voters to approve a constitutional convention. Am I correct there?
No, that is not correct. The general process for amending the state constitution is that a majority of the Assembly and the Senate agree during one edition of the state legislature to a constitutional amendment. And then after an intervening election, a new edition of the state legislature, again a majority of the Assembly and the Senate, agree to that same version of the constitutional amendment. And once that has happened, the constitutional amendment goes to a vote of the people of New York. And that can occur, and has occurred numerous times. In fact, I think it was a couple of years ago, there were 6 constitutional amendments on the state ballot. And if a majority of the people of New York agree with the constitutional amendment, it becomes part of our Constitution. That is the traditional way of amending the state Constitution. It is true that next year there is a question on the ballot about having a constitutional convention, but that is the far rarer way of amending the state Constitution.
So in other words, we can have a constitutional convention without the voters having definitely approved it in a referendum?
You can amend the Constitution. It requires a referendum,
Right.
but it does not require a constitutional convention.
Okay. All right. So given what I've heard from my colleagues before about the time that we're talking in years now, not just next month or something, wouldn't this, and I understand what you're doing here, and I think this is something that has to be done in one way or another, but wouldn't we be a little premature now in doing this as opposed to waiting till we know we're going to have the convention and then introducing a possible amendment at that time? Because if we're not going to have the convention this year or next year, wouldn't it be more appropriate to say let's refine this, or maybe we want to add something to it just before we introduce it as an amendment?
No, Mr. Dunn, my apologies. I tried to interrupt this. I thought I had permission to, but...
Well, I told you, I'm not a scholar and I'm not an attorney.
No, that's okay. But as Mr. McKevitt mentioned, it does not make sense to delay the implementation of a pension forfeiture constitutional amendment. Were we to wait for the possibility of a constitutional convention, the Constitutional Convention question is voted on in November 2017. Were it to be approved, the delegates to a Constitutional Convention would be elected in November of 2018. Over the course of 2019, the convention would meet, and at some point in 2019, the convention would propose amendments to the Constitution, which could include pension forfeiture, but it might not. There's certainly no guarantee in that process. And so at the earliest, the Constitutional Convention could introduce pension forfeiture in 2019. Whereas if we adopt this pension forfeiture constitutional amendment that's in front of us, it could be adopted as early as 2017 by the voters of the people, by the voters of New York. And that's something that I think New Yorkers want to see occur as soon as possible.
So based on that, it could be done the sooner, as you say. That means it could be amending the Constitution without the convention?
Correct, which is the normal procedure for amending the state constitution.
Okay.
Obviously, the Constitutional Convention question is a separate one that voters will have to decide on. But in the meantime, this legislature will continue to do our role in proposing amendments to the Constitution, and hopefully we choose ones that the people of New York support. Overall, we have a pretty good record on that front.
Well, I did not understand the process very well, but thank you very much.
I hope I've been able to clarify. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Speaker.
Mr. Goodell.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Mr. Buckwall.
Yes,
Would you yield?
thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Buckwall yields. Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Mr. Buckwald, and I appreciate all your efforts. I know you've been working on this for some time. If I'm correct, this particular version of the constitutional amendment we adopted a year ago.
Correct. Exactly a year ago.
We sent it over to the Senate, and it died in the Senate on January 6th of this year, exactly 6 months ago.
That's true.
Following up on a question of my colleague, do we have any indication that this bill that we're considering tonight has been introduced in the Senate?
I believe that upon our passage of this constitutional amendment, it goes to the Senate. And so we would be essentially introducing it in the Senate. I don't know, and I certainly can't speak to the Senate, for the Senate as to exactly what procedure they will use when it comes to considering this constitutional amendment. They might decide to have someone else formally sponsor it. They might decide just to take up directly the Assembly bill number. But in any case, we will be helping the Senate along by passing it in this House.
At this point, is there a companion resolution pending before the Senate that is consistent with this bill?
I don't believe so, but I haven't checked our Legislative Retrieval Service in the last half hour or so.
And to your knowledge, is there even a Senate sponsor for a version that's consistent with this bill?
Well, not to my knowledge. Having said that, last year, the Senate passed constitutional amendment was sponsored by a fellow I call Senator Budget. Senator Budget is not actually a real person. It's just a label that's given for any bill that's considered as part of the state budget. Senator Budget's been very difficult for me to reach in the last year in order to help urge the Senate on to speedily approve a constitutional amendment. So I think that's been part of the communications problems, but thankfully a year later, I believe we've made progress.
Now, I appreciate I'm asking you questions about a different body. And your expertise, of course, relates to our body. But do you know if the Senate is even going to be in session tomorrow?
It is my understanding, having sat here in the Assembly during today's session, that there seems to be a general consensus that the state Senate will not only is currently in session, but will also be in session tomorrow. Believe me, I would not be putting this forward if I did not believe that the Senate would have a full opportunity to take this up.
Now, since this was adopted a year ago, so the Senate's had an entire year, and we also have had an entire year since we adopted it last year. Has this gone through any of our committees or been otherwise reviewed by any of us during that 1 year period?
In terms of the formal committee process, like any piece of legislation that passes this House in the first year of legislature, it comes back to our calendar, meaning our third reading calendar, that we are allowed to then take up at any point during this year's session. So formally, this bill did not move through the committee process this year, but that's because it moved through the committee process last year. And of course, it has been on the third reading calendar during this session. There's been lots of discussion on pension forfeiture, but not only have we, as members of the Assembly, but members of the public have had an opportunity to look at this legislation and to comment on it as they see fit.
Now, yesterday, though, the Judiciary Committee did consider another one of your bills, A 6722, and unanimously passed it in Judiciary, correct?
Correct, and I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee, so I gladly voted for my own bill.
And that bill, 6722, was identical, if I'm not mistaken, to the bill that was passed by the Senate last year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, I'm looking, of course, at the Constitution Article, looks like it's Article 19 that deals with amendments to the Constitution. And I do not see any language in that article that requires a constitutional amendment on the first reading to be adopted in the same calendar year. In fact, it's completely silent on that. I know there's an Attorney General's opinion that says that the second passage has to occur in the first legislative session following, but no corresponding case or language or any other ruling that states that those two amendments, the first two passages, have to be in the same legislative session. Are you aware of any other language or court rulings indicating that both houses have to act in the same calendar year?
I personally am not. Having said that, I would say that I'm not the full repository of knowledge as to the process for adopting constitutional amendments. I've become quite expert on it over the last 4 years, but I will say there are some provisions that might be beyond my legal expertise, which is why, of course, we have other good colleagues, yourself included, to help advise us.
So if today, instead of considering Assembly Rule 7704, with Assembly Bill 7704, which we know is inconsistent with the position that the Senate has already taken, if instead we were considering your other bill, we know that your other bill language has been approved by the Senate. They did it last year. We know that. And if I'm correct in the way I read the Constitution, and I might be, I don't know, but if I am, then we'd be all set. So why aren't we considering 6722 that you and I and all the members of the Judiciary Committee unanimously approved yesterday, and the Senate has already signed off on? Why aren't we considering that bill?
But, Mr. Speaker, I'd say, separate from obviously the substantive differences of the bills, as to this procedural point, the one thing I would say is that, although obviously you've put forward an interpretation of the possibility that Assembly passages this year would completely fulfill the requirements to amend the Constitution on the first passage, since it's also possible that interpretation is incorrect, I would say when it comes to amending the state Constitution, it is important to make sure that we know we have left this session with complete full passage of a constitutional amendment on pension forfeiture. I don't want to leave any doubt on that front whatsoever.
Thank you very much. And again, I do appreciate your continuing efforts, and I know you've been working very hard on this, and I appreciate all those efforts, as I'm sure others do as well.
Mr. Speaker, if I could just say, I certainly hope that if we pass this, and the Senate does as well, that those efforts get to continue into the next legislature, although that's obviously not entirely up to me. It's up to the great people of the 93rd Assembly District. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill.
On the bill.
Thankfully, now that we have these electronic devices on our desk, we can all look up the actual language of the Constitution. And for those of you who want to do that, you just click on legislative research, and right there in the broad category is the New York State Constitution. You kind of go to the back of it, Article 19, and you can read it. And it's not that complicated. And what it says is you have to have concurrent resolutions. The amendment has to be approved in the Senate, and the exact same language has to be approved in the Assembly. Doesn't require it to be done in the same year. That is not in the language. But don't take my word for it. Read it. It's right in front of all of you. All 150 of us have the opportunity to pull the language out and read it, and thankfully, our forefathers had the wisdom to write in plain English. So we know that tonight, if we adopted 6722, Mr. Buchwald's bill that is identical to the Senate's bill, we know at that point we'd be moving forward on pension forfeiture, because at that point in time, our House and the Senate would be agreeing on identical language, and we would be moving forward. We also know that the bill before us is not the same as what the Senate passed. And we know that this bill, this exact language, was given to the Senate a year ago. And they never adopted it. And we know that this exact language actually died in the Senate 6 months ago. 6 months ago today. So it seems to me that we're not being serious about reaching agreement with the Senate and moving forward. Instead, we're putting together a proposal that we know has already died. We know they haven't taken it up for a year. We know it's at the very end of the legislative session. We know what they accept. And we know what our own Judiciary Committee recommended to us unanimously. And what's the difference in the language between the two bills? Well, one is very narrow in scope, and the other is very broad in scope. One gives broad authorization to revoke the pension or to forfeit the pension of a public official. Very broad. And the second one's very narrow. So I'm just speaking on my behalf. We have an opportunity to move forward with pension forfeiture, or we have an opportunity to block pension forfeiture by insisting on language the Senate has not approved. Our own Judiciary Committee has approved the language that would enable us to move forward. It's not the language before us now. Thank you for allowing me to share those observations, and for all those of you who are interested, you can pull up the constitutional language and check it for yourself while we wait. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Goodell. Record the vote. Mr. Buchwald to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank a great many of my colleagues who have been supportive of this effort for many years, but especially this year, including our Speaker, Carl Hastie, who has helped, I believe, get us on the verge of being able to address something that the people of New York have been demanding for quite some time. It is a marked accomplishment, although I certainly believe that more needs to be done. I'm also one who believes that the proof of real commitment to reform is to actually produce results. And this effort, given that I believe it will be followed by passage in the Senate, will do that. I want to thank those who have been supportive of this effort, particularly the members of the people of New York but also find groups like Citizens Union, Common Cause, and League of Women Voters in New York State. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I very proudly vote in the affirmative.
Mr. Buckwall in the affirmative. Ms. Cancel.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to register my vote. I represent the 65th Assembly District. My community has been directly affected by this corruption. I thank the Speaker, and I hope this is the beginning of our ethics reform. I vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Ms. Cancel in the affirmative. Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I was very pleased to take in the discussion this evening. And clearly the comments made by, most recently by our colleague about the bill matching Mr. Buckwall, matching 6722 has not been lost. And I would dare say that if we are serious, Mr. Speaker, if we're serious about pension reform, we should bring that bill to the floor and pass that bill as well. We should have both bills passed, give it an option for the Senate to adopt either, send both bills to the governor, let the governor decide. But we should not be taking a gamble on a matter that is so gravely important to the people of our state. And we have heard it repeatedly. And the comment was made that we've heard it in the North Country. We've heard it in central New York. We've heard it in the Catskills. We've heard it in the Hudson. You've heard it in New York City. We've heard it from every peak and every valley of this state that ethics reform must happen now. So I've been here many years. I've seen bills where we passed it in one house or we couldn't possibly match it with the Senate, but we did our best. And we passed the bill in one house, but we couldn't find a way to have the exact matching bill passed in the other house. None of us dare go home with that because the public will know that it's not true. The public will know that there was a lack of desire from the Senate and Assembly to do the right thing, which is to provide meaningful relief and ethics reform. And pension forfeiture is the crown jewel of that entire discussion. So for us to simply pass one bill, and I am happy to support this bill, I vote in the affirmative. We better get the other bill as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Lopez in the affirmative. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 132, noes 0.
The resolution is adopted. Ms. Morelli.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'd urge people just to hang on just for a minute so I can give direction about tomorrow. But before I do that, are there any resolutions or housekeeping?
Yes, we have housekeeping. Assembly Bill 6563A on behalf of Mr. Abadi. Motion to reconsider the vote by which the bill passed the House. Clerk will record the vote. Clerk will announce the results. Bill is before the House. On a motion by Mr. Abadi, Senate bill is before the House. The Senate bill is advanced. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. Announce the results.
This act shall take effect immediately. No.
Record the vote. Announce the results.
Ayes 85, noes 1.
The Senate bill is passed. We have another piece of housekeeping. Without objection, on a motion by Ms. Jaffe to reconsider the substitution of Senate Bill 7952A for Assembly Bill 10458A, said Senate bill is recommitted to the Committee on Ways and Means, and said Assembly bill is restored to its place on the order of third reading. We have numerous resolutions. We'll take them up in one vote. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Resolutions are adopted. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, sir. I have to change the script a little. Now it appears that we are now adjourning until Friday, June 17th at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. Tomorrow being a session day. Be well, everyone. See you tomorrow.
The Assembly stands adjourned.